I went to find a Teochew monk who was staying in Ipoh for 20 over years, but he's Thai. So, because he couldn't get Malaysian citizenship, he went back to Thailand. So I went to visit him. And then he advised me, I said, if you want to stay in Thailand and practice, you should ordain, otherwise you can be accused of being a false monk, wearing Thai robes, but you are not ordained in the Thai tradition. So I took the ordination, and then I stayed with him for 3 months. After that, I went to Wat Pa Nanachat, which is a branch monastery of Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah is another famous monk in Thailand. And Wat Pa Nanachat is actually translated as the International Forest Monastery, all Western monks. At that time, I went there, I spent my first vasa, 3 months there. At that time, 12 of us were there. 10 of them were Western monks, 2 Malaysians. And then I learned that actually one Malaysian monk had died in their wat about a year ago. He was from Ipoh. He went on alms round and got bitten by a rabid dog. And they didn't realize that the dog was rabid. So he died. It was a very sad case because his parents didn't want him to ordain. And against his parents' wishes, he ordained. And they kind of disowned him. So he died in Thailand, never came back. So I spent my first vasa there. You know, orang putih, they like to read a lot. So the library is stock full of books. So I studied the suttas there. And when I studied the suttas, I found that, a lot of contradiction between Theravada and Mahayana teachings. Because I had spent 9 years in Mahayana, I was very familiar with the Mahayana teachings. So when I read the Theravada suttas, the discourses of the Buddha, I found a lot of contradictions. Then when I started thinking, then I realized, if one sees white, one sees black, both cannot be correct. Yeah. So you have to think which one is correct. Then I realized that even in Mahayana sutras, there are contradictions. So I was happy to change to Theravada. So now I've been in Theravada for 20 years. And during this time when I was in Theravada, I studied a lot. Being one of those monks who have studied through university, I had the capability of studying all the books. So having studied all the books, I realized that even in Theravada, there are contradictions. There are wrong teachings. And these wrong teachings comes about because of later books. So unless you make an exhaustive study, a lot of things you take for granted to be the Buddha's teachings may not be. For example, probably all of you believe that the Buddha was a son of a king. Is that true? I think most people have been told that the Buddha was a prince and that his father was the king and he was a brave young man. And later he married and then he saw 4 sights and that made him want to renounce. And then in the middle of the night he stole away from his wife. He took a last peep at the wife and the son and he stole away in the middle of the night. Sounds very romantic, but unfortunately a lot of it is not true. So a lot of, what is the truth actually? The Buddha belonged to the warrior caste, the blue blood. Like in Malaysia we have Tunkus and Rajas. But are all Tunkus and Rajas the son of a king? No. Yeah. When I was working, there was a Raja who was a peon, office boy. a very poor Raja. He was called Raja because he belonged to that royal family. So in the same way, our Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, belonged to the warrior clan. But his father was not the king. In the Majjhima Nikaya, it is stated that the Buddha was a citizen of Kosala country. At that time, during the Buddha's time, two countries were prominent, Kosala and Magadha. And sometimes they went to war against each other. So, Kosala had only one king, and that was Pasenadi, Raja Pasenadi. He was the same age as the Buddha. And then some people say, okay if the Buddha's father was not the king, at least he was the chief of the Sakyans. That also is wrong. The chief of the Sakyans was a man called Bhaddiya. And he was a very good friend of Anuruddha, Arahant disciple of the Buddha. So, when Anuruddha decided to renounce, he asked his parents' permission, and his parents loved him so much, they did not want to give him permission, and he kept begging his parents for permission to renounce. So his parents thought his best friend is Bhaddiya, the chief of the Sakyans. So they gave him a condition. If your good friend Bhaddiya will renounce, we will also let you renounce. So he went to ask his friend Bhaddiya to renounce. His friend said, I don't want to renounce. I'm happy as I am, being the chief of the Sakyans. So he kept persuading his friend. He said, if you don't renounce, I cannot renounce. My parents put this condition for me. So he's being his very good friend. His friend said, you give me 7 years to think about it. After 7 years, then I will renounce. Then he said, 7 years is too long to wait for you. So his friend said, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. Until finally 1 week. So he said, okay, 1 week is not too long to wait. So after 1 week, he put his everything in order in his family. Then Bhaddiya went to renounce with Anuruddha. And then a few of these royal family princes, they renounced together. And actually Bhaddiya had such good karma, he was the chief of the Sakyans, that he was the first to become an Arahant. So after he became an Arahant, he was so happy, going around Sukha. So people started to think, why is this Bhaddiya saying Sukha? Last time he was the chief of the Sakyans, he had so much Sukha. Now he must be thinking of all the Sukha he left behind. What's there? It's complaining is Sukha. So they went to complain to the Buddha. So the Buddha called him and asked him to explain. So he explained. He said, formerly when I was the chief of the Sakyans, my life was always in danger. So I had bodyguards around me all the time. During the day, everywhere I went, my bodyguards followed me. At night also, my palace was surrounded by bodyguards. In spite of all that, I lived in constant fear for my life. But now, I have no more this fear. He was hinting that he was an Arahant, no more self. He said, I go anywhere, I'm not afraid. So the Buddha confirmed that he had become an Arahant. So you see from here, some of these things you won't know unless you read the Vinaya books. So Bhaddiya was the chief of the Sakyans. And the other point was when the Buddha decided to renounce, he did not steal away from his family in the middle of the night. Actually, in the Majjhima Nikaya, it is stated in broad daylight, he decided to walk away from the house. He put on yellow robes, cut off his hair, and his parents pleaded with him and cried and pleaded with him. In spite of his parents pleading with him, he left in full view of them, walked out of the house. Why? Because if you study the suttas, he had to go this way. In the Gatikara Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha said that he only actually met only one Buddha. Later books said that he met 24 Buddhas, that he made a vow to become a Buddha and all that. All that is rubbish. In the suttas, he only met one Buddha, and that was Buddha Kassapa. And when he met Buddha Kassapa, at that time he was a Brahmin. And being a Brahmin, he had no faith in the Buddha Kassapa. But his best friend was an Anagamin, disciple of the Buddha, even though he was a lay person, the pot maker, Bhatikara. And his friend asked him many times to go and see the Buddha. He was not interested. He said, why go and see a shaveling monk? So his friend had to pull him, he pulled back until his friend pulled him by the hair. You know, at that time he was a Brahmin, high caste, and his friend was a pot maker, Parya, low caste. You cannot pull a high caste man by the hair, you can get killed for it. So his friend, this Brahmin, our Bodhisattva, he was shocked. He asked his friend, is it that important? I mean, what he meant was, is it so important you dare to pull my hair? His friend said, yes. He said, okay, you let go of my hair, I'll go and see your teacher. So they both went to see the Buddha Kassapa. So his friend Gatikara paid deep respect to the Buddha and sat down. But our Bodhisattva, he just said, hello, and sat down. So then the Bodhisattva, this Gatikara, he told the Buddha Kassapa, say, Bhagava, this is my good friend, Jotipala. He is a Brahmin. Please teach him some Dhamma. Then out of compassion, the Buddha Kassapa taught him the Dhamma. Usually for newcomers, the Buddha will teach a graduated discourse, which I have tried to imitate in the book called The Message of the Buddha, culminating in the Four Noble Truths. Just by hearing that discourse, he made a 180 degrees turn. He had complete faith in the Buddha, and within a few days he renounced, became a monk. And during that lifetime under the Buddha Kassapa, he must have attained at least the first jhana. Why? Because after that lifetime, he went to the Tusita heavens. And then he came back in his last lifetime. As a young boy, 10 years old, he could enter the first jhana under the jambu tree when his father was overseeing the plowing. Yeah? You all know that story, isn't it? That is in the Vinaya books. So that confirms that he had attained the first jhana, at least under the Buddha Kassapa. Now some people like to say, oh, you attain jhana, you'll go to the Brahma heavens, you'll go to the form realm. It's very obvious here, you don't go. You only go if you constantly, every day, absorb yourself in the jhana. Every day you absorb yourself in the jhana, then you are reborn in the jhana plane. But if you don't absorb yourself every day in the jhana, you don't get reborn in the jhana plane, you go to the sensual realm. From there he came back. So the real Bodhisattva, in the suttas, the earliest discourses, if you investigate carefully, the Buddha used this word Bodhisattva only for the last 3 lifetimes. When he was a disciple of the Buddha Kassapa, Then when he went to the Tusita heaven, and then when he came back for his last birth. So actually what is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is an Arya. A bodhisattva is an Arya. If a person is not a bodhisattva, he's not an Arya. If he's not an Arya, he's not a bodhisattva. But nowadays they distort the fact and say that the Jataka stories, our bodhisattva in his past life, he was a deer, he was a rabbit, and all that is rubbish. Those Jatakas are stories only. And you believe those stories? A lot of people believe. Why? Because they never have yoniso manasikara. They don't think about it. If you think about it, can animals talk or not? In the Jataka stories, the animals talk. Yeah? Animals behave better than human beings. The story of the rabbit, they say that in the previous life, our bodhisattva was a rabbit. Then he saw the hunter go to the forest and hunt. All day he could not get any animal. Then at night he was very hungry. He was cooking his pot, supposed to cook meat, but he had no meat, so he was boiling water. And out of compassion for him, this rabbit jumped into the pot, sacrificed his life for the hunter so that he could fill his stomach. Any logic? If the rabbit was so smart, it wouldn't be born as a rabbit, isn't it? Even stories like the Vesantara Jataka, where they say to perfect his parami, the Buddha in his previous life, gave away his wife and his children to the poor beggar, but the merciless beggar. After giving the wife and the children to the beggar would beat them. Any logic or not? I dare say it's rubbish. Why? Because it contradicts the Dhamma. If you study the Dhamma, the Buddha's discourses, the Buddha said, a good man's offering, a good man's charity does not harm himself and does not harm others. Just as you cannot go and slaughter a chicken and offer to a monk, you also cannot offer your wife and children to a merciless beggar who will beat them. Yes or not? So it just simply contradicts the Buddha's Dhamma. In the same way, that story about the Jataka story about our Buddha in his previous life, he saw the hungry tiger. So hungry, had no milk to give the cubs. So the Buddha in his past life committed suicide, jumped down from the hill, killed himself to offer the tiger. That is another stupid story, because if he kills himself for the tiger having tasted human flesh, tomorrow will look for some more human flesh to eat. And besides, he will cause his parents to a lot of suffering, or his wife and children a lot of suffering. So all these Jataka stories are no different from Andersen's tales or Grimm's fairy tales. But of course, when we are simple-minded, when we are young, we listen to fairy tales and they live happily ever after. And we are so happy. So nice, they live happily ever after. But there's no such thing. So this is one of those things that we have been taught to believe. There are many other things in the Dhamma that go against the actual Buddha's teachings. So now the Dhamma is very polluted. You have to be very, very careful. You don't have to believe what I say. You can study yourself. But if you want a shortcut, then you can listen to my Dhamma talks which I have given to Brother Go. English and Hokkien. 4 MP3s of English and 4 MP3s of Hokkien. all my Dhamma talks since 1988. Most, not all, most of them are there. And I tried to expose some of the wrong teachings. Why? Because I wasted many years. So, this is compassion. Some people think I want to talk bad about other teachings. It's not that I want to talk bad. If I know the Dhamma, I should teach what is true Dhamma, what is wrong Dhamma. The Buddha also had the courage to do the same thing. In the suttas, we find there were 6 external sect teachers during the Buddha's time. They were very famous in India. But some of them taught rubbish, like there's no karma, there's no karma vipaka, there's no afterlife. After you die, there's nothing left. All these kind of teachings. And the Buddha dared to scold them. The Buddha said that fool, Makali Gosala Putta, is leading all the people into the woeful plains because of his teaching of no karma vipaka. The Buddha said, just like a net that the fishermen use to trap the fish, they put all these bamboo stakes and all that. The fish will follow, and then it go into a trap and it cannot come out. So the Buddha said, in the same way, Makali Gosala Putta, that fool, is trapping all these people into wrong views and leading them into the woeful plains. So because the Buddha dared to talk like that, a lot of people used to scold him. That is why in the sutta the Buddha said, I do not quarrel with the world. The world quarrels with me. He who teaches the Dhamma does not quarrel with the world. Also in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, those monks who teach what is our Dhamma as Dhamma, they are leading a lot of humans and devas into wrong view. They are causing hardship and suffering to all these people, and they create a lot of demerit for themselves. But those monks who say what is our Dhamma, then they bring happiness and bliss to humans and devas, and they create a lot of merit for themselves. So the Buddha is encouraging us to point out what is our Dhamma as our Dhamma, what is Dhamma as Dhamma. But sometimes, because I dare to speak out, I create enemies. But we teach the Dhamma not to be popular, not to become famous. We teach the Dhamma because we are disciples of the Buddha. We are not disciples of some Achan, or we are not disciples of some Sayadaw. We are Sakya Putta, sons of the Sakyan. That is the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha said, be a lamb unto yourselves, be a refuge unto yourselves, with no other refuge. Take the Dhamma as your lamb, take the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge. So the Buddha said, rely on yourself and rely on the Buddha's teachings. Don't rely on anything else. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, in the future, there may be some monk who is very senior and very famous, so famous that he has a lot of disciples, monk disciples, nun disciples, and lay person disciples, a large following. And he may be very learned in the scriptures, in the books, but in spite of all that, he still can have wrong view. So don't think that some monk is world famous, that everything he teaches is correct. That is why when the Buddha was about to enter Nibbana, Venerable Ananda asked him, Bhagavan, after you are gone, whom should we follow as our teacher? They probably thought that the Buddha was going to appoint Venerable Kassapa or somebody as the successor. The Buddha said no. The Buddha said, after I am gone, take the Dhamma Vinaya as your teacher. Also in another sutta, in Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, if some monk says that such and such is the Buddha's teachings, don't welcome it, but don't scorn it also. Compare what he says with the suttas and the Vinaya. If it is in agreement with the suttas and it is in agreement with the Vinaya, take that to be the Buddha's words and follow it. But if it contradicts the suttas and it contradicts the Vinaya, then you can be sure that it's not the Buddha's words and reject it. So, Vinaya, you see, concerns monks. Nowadays only monks. So for lay people, your teacher, now that the Buddha is not around, is the suttas. And I've tried to point this out in a book I wrote called Liberation. I did not bring many copies because books are heavy to carry. I gave 4 copies to Brother Gore. Another 4 copies on meditation to Brother Gore. If you all are interested, you can either photostat it or reprint it. Doesn't cost very much to reprint, less than $1, provided you print 2,000 or 3,000 copies. So, I think I'll take a breather and invite any questions. What is the Buddha's advice concerning politics? Politics is something it's okay for lay people to go into, but not for monks. If monks go into politics, they put themselves at great risk. You see, in Myanmar, in Burma, monks like to go into politics, and also in Sri Lanka. But what happens is that, like in Myanmar, many of them get jailed. And also in Sri Lanka. But besides getting jailed, I've heard that some of them get hauled up for questioning in the middle of the night, and they never come back. So, it is not the monk's business to be involved with politics, because politics is a worldly matter. The Buddha said a monk's job is to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, to look for liberation. One thing good about monks in Thailand generally is that Thai monks don't get themselves involved with politics. That is why a few years ago, when there was political unrest in Thailand, particularly in Bangkok, there was a photo taken. There was curfew and nobody was allowed to go into the streets. But the monks, as usual, every morning they come out on arms round in the bath. And the soldiers would not shoot them. The soldiers would not obstruct them. They can go on their arms round because the soldiers know and the government knows that the monks don't dabble in politics. They still can chari makan, they still can practice. But like in Burma, there's hardly any forest monasteries now. Not like in Thailand. Thailand, you go to remote areas, you find everywhere forest monasteries. In Myanmar, if you are a monk there and you try to be a forest monk, you go from district to district, you know what happens? You go to one district, they suspect you of being a government spy. And they ask you some questions in their local dialect. If you can't answer properly, they kill you. So, Thailand is, even though there are some Thai monks who go wrong ways, corrupt monks, but actually the percentage is much less. Thailand is a country with between 200,000 to 300,000 monks. So even you take 1% of monks who are corrupt, how many already? 1% is not much. But Thailand being a country where they are quite open, If a monk gets out of line, they'll publish it in the newspaper. Not that monks in Sri Lanka or Myanmar don't do the same thing. They do the same thing, but nobody publishes it in the newspaper. So there is a saying among Theravada countries, if you want to study the suttas, go to Sri Lanka. If you want to study the Vinaya, go to Thailand. If you want to study the Abhidhamma, go to Myanmar.